I think the more you can empathize with the person in that situation, the more value you can bring, and the better the connection is, the more listings you're going to get out of this.
I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about pre-foreclosures with Jeremy back out of St. George, Utah. Jeremy, thanks for being with us today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So first of all, when you're making this call, they're already in a defensive position. This is a expired plus embarrassed situation.
Yeah.
So they're already in a defensive situation. So the first thing you have to do is kind of break through the ground to even get them talking. And what happens is I found like earlier when I would make calls, I tried to turn it into about me. So I would talk way too much. And what I needed to do was turn it into about them, ask them questions, actually listen to what they're saying, and then ask the follow-up questions like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Oh, why are you thinking about doing that? Well, if you could wave a magic wand, what would that look like, right? The different things to get them talking, because in order for me to get them to a negative mindset to a positive mindset, which is really hard on the phone, I got to get them talking about something exciting, some dream they have, some goal, where they're going, and just put this back into perspective that this is a small setback. Let's see if we can get you to your goals and dreams faster. Are you excited to do that? See if we can get this out of your way. Let me help you do that. And have that conversation with them to get them from a negative to a positive mindset. So the first thing I'm going to determine is if they're willing to even let me have a chance. If they're not, we wish them the best. We got to move on. But if they are, and we can get them talking about that stuff, then the conversation is actually a really good conversation. And I think the mistake I made early on, then I would try to jump in with, well, here's what I can do for you. Instead of saying, well, how can I help you? And ask them to tell me what they'd like me to do for them. And then when you sit down with them, you set up the plan, you do the listing, you make sure they understand their timeline of when we got to get this sold, especially if they have a lot of equity. We can't price crazy in this market if we only have 30 days to get you sold before we get you out. And every situation's a little different. It might be a forbearance that they just did. They might have just lost their job and they're trying to recover, and they say, well, let's see if we can sell it for this. But understanding the situation, give them the right advice so you can get it listed and priced right. And then of course in our market, if we price them right, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is don't be afraid to say no to these people. And we have to tell them the truth. Like the worst thing we can do is they say, well, my home's worth this and this. We're like, yeah, let's try it. No, you have a problem here. Let's get you sold. Tell them the truth. You know what it has to be priced. They respect you quickly if you are willing to say no to them. So the first thing is understanding your process in your state, like how long the foreclosure process takes, what their options are, and just kind of the basic knowledge of what the person will go through. And then the second thing I would do is understand who the HUD counselors are, who are the free counselors set up by the government or set up by Fannie and Freddie Mae to actually give advice and help steer these guys into the right direction. I would ask around the office or in the area of what agents actually ran successful bank-owned and short-sold businesses.
Okay.
Also who dealt and spent a lot of time in that world in my county, in my area. And I would be buying lunches, because what I want to understand is what they went through and what their experience was, because I think that's going to be huge leading into this, because then you can kind of describe the experience to the client. The other thing I would look for are, you go to my title company, they send you a list of foreclosures. I want to know who the attorneys are that are doing the foreclosing, because the list of those defaults will be, and when those auctions are, will be on their websites. So I want to get to know the process. I want to talk to them. I want to communicate with them and potentially try to even build a relationship, take one out to lunch, and just understand what the process is, what the people go through. I went to the auctions and met the investors. And I gave them my card. I got as much information. I found out what business names they were buying them in, and I got as much information as I could. I learned really quick that group was the least loyal group ever to real estate agents. They would use me for a little bit, and they would burn me and turn me. And I got burned so many times on putting deals together for them. It was crazy. But what I realized is they were loyal to one person besides themselves, and that was the money. And so what I did was I started researching with the title companies on their properties, who was putting the trust deeds on the property. And I was contacting those guys and they were the actual money.
Gotcha.
And then I started building relationships with them through this process. So if we did have a quick sell somebody, I wanted to know who would loan the money if I brought an investor to the table. So if the certain person says, I just need to get out and it was a good play, I wanted to know who the money was, and then I could get one of my investors that were loyal to me, and I would attach them to the money. So now they're loyal to me through the money and do the deal and then resell it with me. So I realized I needed to understand the money first.
Okay.
And that's on a separate thing. Now that money funds 4 or 5 builders that I list for and is worth 30 to 40 transactions for me every single year on new construction. Because now that money's funding construction, and they'll go back and fund this other stuff. It's just not as readily there, and it's a little more risky right now than new construction is for us in my market. But because of that relationship, I built a big new construction business because I was able to get these lenders and who the actual money was, because everyone says they have money, but who was actually owning the money. I was able to build the relationships with these private entities and these private hard money guys. Now I got that going. I want to work on finding out which markets I want to chase where these foreclosures are happening. Okay. And because we're so limited, when they pop up on the screen, or if I get them from the title company, I don't call them unless they're actually in my markets that I'm working right now or in my areas.
Okay.
Eventually, as it gets bigger.
You're talking just your geographic market.
Correct. Just the little zip codes I work.
Okay.
But when they're in there, is that you can't hesitate. You need to call them immediately because they're going to get blown up with so much mail and so much stuff. They still do. Hey, let us put in a trust, or hey, let us do this, or hey, here's an offer, but I have 90 days to get the offer and walk away when your foreclosure is ticking on you, is coming down. So call them immediately, see if there's any opportunity to sit down and talk to them. And the other reason I want to work them in my market is I already know what they're worth, and I already know what I could sell them for the most part without seeing the inside. So I kind of have an idea of what's going on. The third thing is I would have a really good relationship with your title company, because I can call my title guy, assistant right now, and say, hey, what trust deed's on the property and what year did it get recorded? So I know the amount and year, because in Utah I can see all that, and they'll send it to me real quick. So I kind of have a general idea of what's recorded against the property. So if I'm looking at a $200,000 townhome and I got 3 loans here stacking up to 300, they're going to need a different plan. They need to get them to a HUD counselor, and it might be a short sale, but I don't do short sales personally, so I would need to refer them to somebody else. And then after I did that and had that information, I would know what I could do to help them, and I would really target and make follow-up phone calls. What we find is agents want to know what to say, the perfect thing, but you don't have to. Just ask more questions. The more questions you ask, the more it kind of opens up the big picture. Because when we're defensive and we're frustrated, we usually don't respond with what we're really thinking. We put the wall up. Yes. But when someone asks you 4, 5, 6 questions and are actually listening, our human nature is to be like, oh, and we either go complete flight and we hang up when we're out, or we'll lower that wall and we'll look for feeling better, and we'll look for that like a solution. Hey, maybe this could help me resolve, and we'll start answering those questions better. And I think that's the biggest mistake we make as agents, is we don't ask enough questions. We don't ask enough questions to get them to tell us about what they wanted to do. So like my first question is do you want to keep this home, or do you have plans to move on? I want to understand what their goal is. And if you keep this home, how are you going to be able to stay out of foreclosure or the default? I want to get into those things, ask them good questions. Then I always ask them, are you getting a lot of attention, or a lot of people mailing you, or a lot of people calling you, knocking your door? A lot of people before COVID, at least, were knocking doors and trying to be, even some pushy salesman type tactics, saying, hey, sign this, we'll try to get a deal with you. I want to understand what they're going through. Then if they want to sell, I go right into a listing presentation. How much equity do you have, or a listing qualification? How much equity do you have? How much do you owe? Where would you go? And try to understand what their motivation would be to help them sell. Just like a normal listing, because now compared to what we said 12 years ago, these guys do have equity. They are going to have a few more options. And so we just have those conversations up front. And by doing those conversations, giving them a little bit of advice, helping them find a HUD counselor, will open the door for you to get the listing now or later on, or referrals from them in the future.